Adler, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of the Judiciary Committee for allowing me to testify about my legislative priorities within the committee's jurisdiction. Our nation is currently dealing with multiple crises that your committee is uniquely qualified to address. First, I would like to speak about the humanitarian, public health, and national security emergency taking place at our southern border. On his very first day in office, President Biden began to systematically dismantle the successful immigration policies of the Trump administration. He stopped construction of the border wall system, brought back Obama-era catch and release policies, undermined interior enforcement, and attempted to end migrant protection protocols, commonly known as the Remain in Mexico policy. That's why I've introduced H.R. 1259, the Remain in Mexico Act, which would codify the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy. Under this successful policy, illegal aliens who arrived at our southern border and claimed asylum were returned to Mexico while they wait for asylum claims to be adjudicated if they did not meet the credible fear test. This effectively ended the Obama administration's catch and release policy, led many who made frivolous claims to return to their country of origin, and acted as a strong disincentive for foreign nationals to make the treacherous journey to our country. The Biden administration's attempts to end this policy and gut other Trump-era border policies have led to record-breaking numbers of illegal aliens flooding our country, putting American citizens at risk. That's why I believe it's critical the committee take up the Remain in Mexico Act and put a stop to this unfortunate and avoidable calamity. Next, I would like to speak to the refugee crisis created by President Biden's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, which led to the administration evacuating over 100,000 Afghan nationals who they have begun to resettle across our nation. These Afghans have not gone through the traditional 14-step, 18-month vetting process required to get a special immigrant visa. In fact, most evacuees did not help our nation and are not eligible for an SIV. Most do not have refugee status. They were simply paroled into the interior of our country by Secretary Mayorkas and resettled across our nation. This is why I've introduced H.R. 5572, the Secure America Act. The Secure America Act would ensure thorough refugee vetting prior to admission and the authority of the Secretary of Homeland Security to parole aliens into our country and reclaim and expand the authority of governors.
Could I ask you a question here? Would you yield for a question?
Sure.
Just very quickly, with respect to the hundreds or thousand or so Afghans who are now already in the country, what would you do with them?
I'm on my way to that, Mr. Chair. I think that they have not been vetted and they should be returned.
To Afghanistan?
I do think that they should be returned to Afghanistan or neighboring countries that share their cultures, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and other areas that they could assimilate much easier and also return to their native country once there is stability there. And it would be better for all involved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Secure America Act would ensure thorough refugee vetting prior to admission and the authority of the Secretary of Homeland Security to parole aliens into the country and reclaim and expand the authority of governors and Congress over the process of admission and the resettlement of these refugees. We cannot compromise the security of our nation in the name of empathy, or we will continue to see instances of violence by Afghan evacuees like we have already seen in Fort McCoy, Fort Bliss, and most recently in Missoula, Montana. I believe the Secure America Act must be immediately taken up to ensure our immigration system preserves and protects our national security and our American way of life. Finally, I would like to address the surge of violent crime throughout the nation. According to a report released by the Federal Bureau of Investigation several weeks ago entitled Crime in the United States 2020, last year the number of homicides and non-negligent manslaughter nationwide increased by 29.4%. and aggravated assault offenses rose by 12.1%. Reports indicate the widespread violence and bloodshed has sadly continued into this year. This violence is clearly enabled by jurisdictions throughout the country considering and in many cases adopting measures to defund or disempower law enforcement. The failure of American cities to enforce the rule of law is why I introduced H.R. 3217, the Lawless Cities Accountability Act. My bill would defund cities and other municipalities that disempower or defund law enforcement, enabling anarchy and lawlessness. It is the responsibility of government to protect the lives and property of all American citizens from unlawful acts of violence and destruction. The federal government should not allow taxpayers' dollars to fund jurisdictions that fail to enforce the rule of law and protect their citizens.
The time of the gentleman.
I urge the committee to take up these important pieces of legislation, and I would yield back. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I forgot to read the obvious, which is that all witnesses should note that their written statements will be entered into the record in their entirety, and accordingly, they should summarize their testimony in 5 minutes. We'll now hear from the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about the American Music Fairness Act, a bill that I introduced with Congress